clinical assessment of mitral regurgitation. Over to you, Guru. You can proceed. I think you have to unmute. Are you able to hear?
Unmute.
Guru Chaithanya, unmute. Go to the slide presentation. Slideshow. Go to slideshow. Yeah.
Respected teachers, my friends and colleagues. So my topic is on mitral regurgitation. My main focus would be on the clinical examination itself. So coming to the mitral regurgitation, it is one of the more common valvular disorder which is commonly seen in our daily practice. It is basically because of the abnormality in any part of the mitral valve apparatus. So the mitral valve apparatus mainly consists of mitral valve leaflet. It has mitral valve leaflets, and that is anterior mitral leaflet and posterior mitral leaflet with the commissures. And there is a abnormality, any abnormality in chorda tendineae, it can lead to regurgitation, or any abnormality in the papillary muscles. We have two papillary muscles in the mitral valve, that is anterolateral papillary muscles and posteromedial papillary muscles. And adjacent abnormality in the left atrium or in the LV, it can lead to mitral valve regurgitation. So most common causes of mitral regurgitation are it may be due to inflammatory phenomenon, which is most common in India, that is rheumatic heart disease associated with mitral stenosis and multivalvular involvement, or it can be degenerative like in mitral valve prolapse, where there is a replacement of valve spongiosa with valve fibrosa with the redundancy of anterior mitral leaflet leading to prolapse. And other common entity which is seen in associated coronary artery disease, where there is a ischemic MR, and infective etiologies like infective endocarditis involving the valve leaflets or chorda tendineae leading to chorda tendinal fracture, or valve perforations leading to flail mitral leaflet and severe mitral regurgitation, or congenital anomalies like there can be cleft mitral valve leaflet leading to regurgitations, or even the trauma also can lead to chordal ruptures. So coming to the major main causes of mitral regurgitation are there is infective etiologies like rheumatic disease, or there can be systemic inflammatory disorders like SLE, which is more common in females, younger individuals around 25 to 30 years of age, and associated in patients even in connective tissue disorders, there is associated involvement of mitral valve apparatus leading to mitral regurgitation, and drugs like ergotamine can cause mitral regurgitation. And coming to the ischemic etiology, the papillary muscles may be involved in that. Papillary muscles also most commonly that posterior papillary muscle is more, posterior medial papillary muscles are more commonly involved because it has only unilateral supply, so increased risk of ischemia leading to papillary muscle dysfunction. Sometimes it may lead to papillary muscle rupture, and there is a chordal rupture with a flail mitral leaflet with severe mitral regurgitation. And even in patients with ischemic cardiomyopathy, or even in a dilated cardiomyopathy, there is associated mitral annular dilatation leading to malcoaptation of mitral leaflets, which can lead to mitral regurgitation. And even congenital connective tissue disorders also can lead to mitral annular dilatation. And there is one more entity where there is a mitral annular aneurysms also, which can lead to malcoaptation of leaflets leading to regurgitation. And after prosthetic valve implantation also, there can be paravalvular leak associated with infective endocarditis or pannus formation leading to valve dysfunction leading to valvular regurgitations. And if there is a bioprosthetic valve, there can be a degeneration of the bioprosthetic valve leading to regurgitation. So most common cause of acute MR is mostly because of the ischemic MR, because most commonly involved that is posterior papillary muscle, which is involved in whenever there is a obstruction to the RCA territory, which can lead to papillary muscle rupture or dysfunction. It can lead to acute MR, or because of the rupture also it can lead to acute MR. And non-ischemic causes like mitral valve prolapse leading to flail mitral leaflet or associated infective endocarditis, and rarely if there is a blunt chest trauma, it can lead to chordal rupture. And iatrogenic causes, as that we are increasingly using that TAVI, and even during left ventricular assist devices, there can be while doing the procedure, it can the pigtail or the wires can entangle with the chordae, which can lead to caudal rupture, and it can lead to mitral regurgitation. Coming to the secondary MR is mostly because of the associated coronary artery disease leading to LV, adverse LV remodeling. So there is a dilatation of mitral annular dilatation leading to mitral regurgitation, and ischemic MR leading to papillary muscle dysfunction. It is more dynamic, and it will be worsens with ischemia. There is dynamic changes in the mitral regurgitation even with exercise, and even with the associated changes in hemodynamic parameters. And secondary MR, like functional MR, can occur in a dilated cardiomyopathy because of the annular dilatation with malcoaptation of leaflets, associated papillary muscle dysfunction. There is a malcoaptation of leaflets which can lead to MR. And in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, there can be systolic anterior motion of mitral leaflet, which can lead to mitral regurgitation. Even in the RV pacing, as there is no AV synchrony, there is associated secondary MR in whenever we do RV ventricular pacing. Coming to the types of mitral regurgitation, it is mostly classified based on the leaflet motion. Whenever there is a normal leaflet motion, that is type 1. With MR, that is most commonly seen in ischemic MR or dilated cardiomyopathy. Or type 2, there is increased leaflet motion. Mostly it is seen in mitral MVP or associated mitral connective tissue disorders like Marfan syndrome. Or there is a leaflet motion with a restrictive opening, mostly in rheumatic heart disease, that is type 3A. And there is a leaflet motion, both restrictive closure also, that is seen in ICMP and dilated cardiomyopathy, that is type 3B. Coming to the pathophysiology of acute MR, in a acute MR, most commonly there is caudal tear leading to flail mitral leaflet. So there is a abnormal regurgitation of blood into the LA, which is the LA size is normal, or it is normal with a huge amount of regurgitation into the LA. There is a abnormal increase in the LA pressures, which can lead to increased pulmonary venous hypertension and pulmonary congestion. So the patient will end up in the pulmonary edema, as there is effective forward stroke volume also is reduced, which can lead to maintain that cardiac output. There is an increase in heart rate, and there is an increased neurohumoral response. So in acute MR patient, the patient is highly unstable. The patient will have pulmonary edema. The patient will have tachycardia with a low tissue perfusion, and patient may be in shock. And associated, there will be a neurohumoral activation, that is increased sympathetic activation because of the low cardiac output, and there is a RAS activation also. So there is a catecholamine surge with an increased sympathetic activity, and with a pulmonary edema. So the main primary response, the compensatory mechanisms which act during the acute MR are first based on the Frank-Starling mechanism. There is an increased end diastolic fiber length, which may slightly improve the ventricular ejection by increasing both the rate and force of contraction. And the secondary compensatory mechanism which occurs is there is decrease in the afterload. Coming to the pressure volume loops, what happens in acute MR, I'll just show you. Here we can see there is once the mitral valve opens, there is a LV filling. Once there is a LV filling, there is once the mitral valve closes, there is an isovolumetric contraction leading to LV ejection, then followed by isovolumetric relaxation. In acute MR, there is no increase in LV dimensions are normal, and even the volumes will not be much increased, but there is an increase in LA pressures, and there is no increase in the LV stress, but there is a decrease in the end systolic volume associated with increased end diastolic volume in acute MR. Whereas in a chronic MR, there is associated compensatory mechanisms which act. There is initially, once there is a gradual increase in regurgitation over time, there is a compensatory dilatation of both left atrium and left ventricle. So there is a LA compliance is increased, even the LV compliance will be increased. So once there is increase in the diameter of the LV, as the increase in diameter of the LV increases, that is once the radius increases, there is associated increased wall stress also. So though initially it looks like it is a favorable outcome, it is as it progresses, it has a decremental effect because there is an increase in LV wall stress. So MR begets MR. It is a vicious cycle. So once there is a compensatory mechanism, then the patient will land up in decompensatory MR, where there is a decrease in ejection fraction with increase in end systolic volume. Associated with that, there is increased LV end diastolic pressures also, with increased left atrial pressures, leading to pulmonary edema and decreased tissue perfusion and shock. So this is the spectrum that we see. Initially, there can be a compensatory MR with a low LV wall stress, but still, as there is a eccentric LV dilatation, there is an increase in the radius of LV. Based on the Laplace law, associatedly, it is directly proportional to the LV wall stress. So the wall stress is increased, and as it further progresses, there is associated large LV dilatation, which further leads to increased end diastolic volume and even increase in the end systolic volume, and leading to increased LA pressures and decreased effective stroke volume, leading to tissue perfusion and pulmonary edema in later stages. So coming to the natural history of MR is highly variable, and it depends on a combination of features like significance of regurgitation, whether is it mild, moderate, or severe, and associated LV function, whether there is associated LV dysfunction or not, and what is the cause of MR. Because asymptomatic patients with a mild primary MR, that is which is not ischemic MR, usually are stable for many years. Once the patient develops severe regurgitation, only a few percent of these patients, only few patients with mild MR goes for severe MR, like if there is associated infective endocarditis leading to the rupture of chorda tendineae or valve perforation leading to severe regurgitations. So there is less likely. So mild MR patients are stable for over many years, and chances of those patients going for severe MR is very low. And the degree of MR is essential determinant of LV remodeling and outcomes. So coming to this chronic MR, asymptomatic patients who are at early stages of these diseases are very benign and they are stable for many years. In contrast, patients who are symptomatic with severe MR, those patients that survival rate is around 60% in 5 years, and who are largely asymptomatic, symptomatic, that is around 60%. Whereas in severe MR, the highly likelihood of patients going for surgery or symptoms is very high within a period of 6 to 10 years. So in a patient with severe MR, there is chances of going for failure or associated symptoms or a patient going for surgery is very high within a period of 5 to 10 years. Coming specifically to the rheumatic MR is commonly associated with mitral stenosis. Only few patients, that is only 10% of the patients, have pure MR. And so as it is still common in India, still MR requiring surgery is still common in rheumatic MR, because there is associated rheumatic mitral stenosis also, and associated involvement of aortic valve and tricuspid valve is common with rheumatic heart disease. And the main mechanism that already has been described, there is a retractile fibrosis of the valvular apparatus, and there is a caudal thickening, which lead to the loss of leaflet coaptation, and there can be associated secondary annular dilatation leading to mitral regurgitation. And patients with a combined mitral stenosis with mitral regurgitation has a poor prognosis, and only within 10 years, only survival rate is only in 30% of the patients. Coming to the other common entity, that is mitral valve prolapse. Here there is replacement of valve spongiosa with valve fibrosa, leading to thickening and degeneration of the valve leaflets, and there is a caudal elongation also. And mostly it is the natural history. It is benign. but there are few high risk indicators like presence of holosystolic murmur, or there is a significant regurgitation with associated with left ventricular and diastolic diameter of more than 60 mm and associated with left atrial enlargement more than 40 mm. These are the high risk predictors. And the presence of symptoms and the LV function also has a effect on the natural progression of this MVP. Here the chances of in a flail mitral leaflet with a severe MR in a 10 years follow-up, there is 30% of the patients developed atrial fibrillation. Around 90% of the patients either they went for surgery or death within 10 years of span, and 60% developed congestive heart failure. So in a flail mitral leaflet with a severe mitral regurgitation, early surgery is definitely indicated. And coming to the ischemic MR, these days the ischemic MR is also most commonly seen, and there is associated even mild MR also will have a significance on the mortality in ischemic MR. It is the main pathophysiology which is involved in ischemic MR. Is it maybe because of the lack of supply to the papillary muscle, mostly the posterior papillary muscle, or it can be because of the adverse LV remodeling leading to the LV dilatation with mitral annular dilatation leading to malcoaptation of leaflets with mitral regurgitation. Coming to the SAVE study, it has shown that even in patients with a mild ischemic MR who are on medical treatment also, there is 30% mortality within a span of 3 to 5 years. Whereas in when there is no MR, the mortality is 10%. There is a significant increase in mortality if there is associated ischemic MR. And even the presence of heart failure, if there is a mild MR, there is a high chances of mortality when compared with without any mitral regurgitation. In the 5-year survival, it is mild MR. It is if it is associated with ischemic MR, it is 47%. Whereas for moderate to severe, it is 29%. Coming to the clinical features of acute MR mainly depends on the LA compliance. As the LA compliance is low, there is an increase in LA pressures leading to pulmonary venous congestion, pulmonedema, with a decreased forward stroke volume. So the patient will have decreased tissue perfusion. So the patient is highly unstable. The presentation is sudden onset. The patient is in pulmonedema with hypotension and the signs and symptoms of cardiogenic shock. Whereas in the chronic MR, the clinical presentation depends on the severity of regurgitation and its rate of progression. Associated pulmonary hypertension, associated other valvular lesions are associated with rheumatic mitral stenosis, or presence of associated abnormal arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, or is it associated with any ischemic heart disease. Most common symptoms are as there is a decrease in effective forward stroke volume, the patient manifests with exertional dyspnea or fatigue, and if there is increase in LA pressure, the patient will have LA pressures with associated pulmonary artery hypertension. The patient will have SOB on exertion. As the LA dilates, as there is a LA remodeling with LA fibrosis, there is a chances of increased incidence of atrial fibrillation. So the patient can manifest with either paroxysmal or persistent atrial fibrillation. Patients with severe MR with LV enlargement, where there is from the compensatory MR, if it goes into decompensated phase, the patient will have both cardiogenic shock with a pulmonary congestion. Whereas in a patient with a mild MR, the patient may develop severe MR in patients with mostly in ischemic MR, because they'll have a dynamic, they are more dynamic. So it varies, either varies with the heart rate or varies with exercise also. The severity of regurgitation changes with the time. So some patients may have mild MR at rest, but on exertion they will have severe mitral regurgitation leading to pulmonedema. Coming to the physical examination in chronic MR, whereas in the carotid pulse, though there is a decrease in forward stroke volume, as there is a decreased ejection, LV ejection time is reduced, there is a rapid brisk pulse. So it looks like aortic regurgitation pulse, but the amplitude is very low because there is a decreased forward stroke volume. That is differentiating between the AR and here, and the pulse pressure is low in mitral regurgitation patients, whereas pulse pressure will be very high in atrial aortic regurgitation patients. And there is no gross abnormal variation in the systolic blood pressure in mitral regurgitation. Whereas in aortic
Excuse me, sir. Sorry to disturb you, sir. There is a alarm sound behind.
Just check where from it is coming. It's disturbing. Guru, you start again. Is it okay? Guru, you can start again.
Sir, is it fine, sir?
I think somewhere some background noise is there.
Sir, actually some alarm is going on in my apartment, sir.
Where?
In apartment itself, the alarm is going on.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So,
Speak loudly.
okay, sir. The coming to the carotid pulse.
Yeah, fine. It's fine. You can go ahead.
Coming to the carotid pulse, though there is a decreased forward stroke volume, the LV ejection time is narrowed. So there is a brisk, quick rising pulse, but with a low amplitude. Whereas in AR, there is increased forward stroke volume also, but there is a pulse pressure is very high in the aortic regurgitation, whereas the pulse pressure is normal in mitral regurgitation, and there is no abnormal alterations in systolic blood pressure in mitral regurgitation. Coming to the jugular pulse is not normally it is normal. For suppose if it is elevated in mitral regurgitation, then we need to suspect there is associated pulmonary artery hypertension. So if there is prominent A wave, that is because of rheumatic MR with a pulmonary associated mitral stenosis with a pulmonary artery hypertension. If there is a prominent V wave with a elevated JVP, then we need to suspect the patient is having associated significant organic tricuspid valve regurgitation or severe tricuspid regurgitation with a PAH. Or if the patient is having PAH with atrial fibrillation, then they can have a prominent V wave. Coming to the LV impulse, the apical impulse is LV type. It is hyperdynamic because of the volume overload, and the contour is normal contour, and there is an increased amplitude of early systolic outward motion. So it is a hyperdynamic pulse, and acute MR, there is no apical displacement. Apical impulse is not displaced, it is in the normal space, whereas in a chronic MR, because of the LV compensatory mechanism with the eccentric LV dilatation, there is a LV enlargement. So the apical impulse is displayed laterally and downwards. And sustained, it is a hyperdynamic LV impulse. If there is a sustained LV impulse, then we need to think that patient is having associated LV dysfunction. That is, patient is landing up in decompensated chronic MR, or the patient is having associated ischemic heart disease leading to LV dysfunction with MR. And there can be in a pericardial examination, then we can palpate even for the systolic apical thrill. Systolic apical thrill signifies there is a significant hemodynamic mitral regurgitation, and even the palpable S3 also signifies there is a severe hemodynamically significant MR. If we can palpate S4, we can definitely rule out rheumatic heart disease, because in a patient with a rheumatic heart disease, S4 is never palpable, or S4 is never heard. Coming to the parasternal impulse, there is a parasternal lift can be there in patients with mitral regurgitation. It is not the parasternal heave, it is just a lift. So that the parasternal lift, that is ill-sustained lift, that is a parasternal lift, it is late systolic, because as there is a large regurgitant jet which is entering into the dilated LA, and it causes a forward thrusting onto the anterior chamber, which is mostly the right ventricle. So in a patient with isolated severe MR with a hugely dilated LA, because of the anterior thrusting towards the RV, there is a late systolic parasternal lift. Whereas if there is a holosystolic heave, that is parasternal, if there is a parasternal heave, then we need to suspect that patient is having associated pulmonary artery hypertension, or the patient is having a rheumatic heart disease with the associated mitral stenosis. So coming to the precordial examination in a nutshell, it is a LV type of apex. Apex beat is a normal it is in the normal position in acute MR, whereas in a chronic MR there is because of the LA enlargement, the apex may be displaced outward and downwards, and there is coming to the parasternal lift, there is a late systolic parasternal lift because of the LA enlargement with the anterior thrusting towards the RV, and if there is significant PAH, then we need to suspect it is mostly because of rheumatic MR associated with MS. Coming to the S1, as it was previously described by my previous presenter, that is S1 is decrease in amplitude because the murmur, the regurgitation will start from the isovolumetric relaxation phase itself. So there is the murmur will mask the S1 amplitude. So S1 is muffled in mitral regurgitation, and there is a loud systolic murmur which is beginning with the isovolumetric LV contraction, and it blurs the S1. And but S1 may be heard whenever if we can hear S1 in a patient with significant MR, then we need to suspect that patient is having associated mitral stenosis, or even in mitral valve prolapse also we can have a loud S1. Coming to the S2 is not S2 normally splits in inspiration, but it is single in expiration. But if we can hear there is a split S2 in expiration with widely split in inspiration, then it signifies there is a hemodynamically significant MR. Why this happens is because there is a decreased LV ejection time, so there is a early aortic valve closure, and so the interval between the A2 P2 is directly proportional to the severity of MR. So the split can be heard even in expiration. So if there is only split in expiration with no additional extra widening in inspiration, then we need to think that the patient is having RV failure. As there is a RV failure, there is no augmentation during inspiration. So in a patient with a severe MR, if the split is not augmented in inspiration, then we need to think there is associated RV dysfunction. And we can hear the loud P2 also in these patients because there is an anterior displacement of pulmonary artery because of the hugely dilated LA, though there is no significant pH. Coming to the S3 signifies there is a hemodynamically significant MR, and sometimes it can be palpable. And whenever we hear there is a S3, it excludes the associated mitral stenosis. But we need to differentiate whether the patient is S3 can be seen even in LV failure also. But in LV, that we can differentiate based on other coincidental findings like LV apex and presence of holosystolic murmur with a good pulse volume, with a good pulse. And how to differentiate between the split S2, opening snap, and S3. So split S2 and opening snap are high pitched sounds, whereas S3 is low pitched, and S2 is best heard. Split S2 is best heard in at the level of the base, whereas in the opening snap and S3 are best heard at the apex. And as S3 is a low pitched sound, it is best heard with the bell, and opening snap and S2 are better heard with the diaphragm. And coming to the posture, A2P2 interval narrows with standing, and S3 may decrease or disappear on sitting. And with the respiration also, A2O interval will stay, doesn't have any much significance with the inspiration, whereas in inspiration, A2P2 will widen. Coming to the intervals, first initially there is a aortic sound, then followed by the pulmonary closure sound, then there is a opening snap, then followed by S3. Coming to the S4, is never seen in patients with rheumatic mitral valve disease. and the presence of S4 in a severe mitral regurgitation, then we need to suspect the patient is having associated, and then we need to think the patient is having acute MR. And S4 of RV origin, it is seen in patients with severe pulmonary artery hypertension. That S4 can be from the S4 of LV can be differentiated from S4 of RV with as S4 of RV there is an inspiratory augmentation and the better heard in the lower sternal border. Coming to the murmur characteristics, the typical murmur of mitral regurgitation murmur, it is a holosystolic murmur. It is a constant amplitude, begins immediately with S1 within the isovolumetric contraction phase and extend into the S2. And it is medium to high frequency murmur, better heard in LV apex and can radiate into the left axilla. Sometimes it can radiate into the second intercostal space where whenever there is a posterior mitral leaflet, flail posterior mitral leaflet with a jet directed towards anteriorly. And even the atrial fibrillation or ventricular premature pills will not have any effect on the murmur characteristics in contradiction with the aortic stenosis murmur. So coming to the main classical features, it is a holosystolic murmur. It starts with S1 and ends with S2. This is the classical type of mitral regurgitation murmur that we'll see. Sometimes we can see late systolic augmentation. This is mostly seen in patients with mitral valve prolapse with MR. And even in a significant severe MR, there can be mid-systolic accentuation. And this is the characteristic murmur of aortic stenosis. Aortic stenosis murmur, it is more of ejection quality and it is not holosystolic. It starts after S2 and ends before starts after S1 and ends before S2. Causes of late systolic tampering of murmur in mitral regurgitation, either in patients with mild mitral regurgitation or in patients with acute mitral regurgitation, there is a late systolic tampering of murmur. Coming to the intensity of pansystolic murmur, if the intensity is increased, that is, if there is grade 4 or more than 4, it denotes there is, which is associated with thrill, it denotes there is a significant mitral regurgitation. Sometimes though there is a severe MR, the intensity may not increase if there is associated LV dysfunction. So the differential features of holosystolic murmur are mitral regurgitation, tricuspid regurgitation and VSD. Mitral regurgitation is better heard at apex, whereas the tricuspid regurgitation is better heard at lower sternal border, and ventricular septal is in the third or fourth intercostal space in the left sternal border. And based on radiation also we can differentiate. Mostly the mitral regurgitation, the murmur radiates most to the left into the axilla and to the back. Whereas there is no selective transmission in tricuspid or tricuspid regurgitation or VSD. And thrill signifies associated systolic thrill signifies significant mitral regurgitation. And thrill is, in comparison with all three lesions, thrill is most commonly seen in ventricular septal defect, and it is mostly seen in left sternal border itself. And coming to the characteristics of the murmur, it is a soft blowing murmur. Whereas VSD, it is a rough murmur. And whereas with respiration or with any atrial fibrillation or VPC, there is no change in the murmur. Whereas the tricuspid regurgitation, there is an increasing of murmur with inspiration. Whereas in the VSD, there is increase during expiration. Other features which can be seen in the significant MR are there is associated LVS3 with a mid-diastolic rumble, and there is a decreased amplitude of S1. Whereas in a significant shunt in a VSD, there is associated PH features. So main characteristic parameters which can have an effect on the intensity of MR murmur, though there is a significant MR, is the patient presence of LV dysfunction, or there is associated other valvular abnormalities like associated mitral stenosis, if there is a large RV, or in a patient with the COPD patients. There is associated mid-diastolic murmur in a significant mitral regurgitation. It starts after S3, and it is a short diastolic rumble. it is hypothesized that it is because of the rapid excessive filling of the distended LV. And we can differentiate between the MDM of MS from this MR because there is a pre-systolic accentuation in mitral stenosis murmur. But in MR, there is only mid-diastolic murmur with no pre-systolic accentuation. And it is very brief, it is low-pitched murmur. Best heard with a bell of stethoscope as it is low-pitched. And coming to specific features, if it is associated with papillary muscle dysfunction, papillary muscles mainly acts during the late phase of the systole. So whenever there is a papillary muscle dysfunction, there is the murmur is mostly because it is more late in systole itself, and there can be associated S3. And there even these patients presents with acute mitral regurgitation, so the patient can have S4 also. And the murmur characteristic, as the papillary muscle main function is in the late phase of the systole, there is a late systolic accentuation in patients with significant MR in mitral papillary muscle dysfunction. And even this has few exceptions, like if the patient is having atrial fibrillation or VPCs, there is a changes in LV volume also. This also will have an effect on the coaptation. So the amplitude of murmur also varies in these patients with atrial fibrillation or VPCs. So in a patient with a papillary muscle dysfunction, there is a systolic accentuation mostly in the late phase of the systole. And coming to the ruptured flail mitral leaflet, mostly it is most commonly the mitral regurgitation murmur radiates to the axilla, but there are few exceptions where it radiates towards the base, that is towards the second intercostal space, which can mimic aortic stenotic murmur. This is seen in posterior flail mitral leaflet with anterior directed jet. And in a physical examination, in a patient with acute MR, they are unstable with a pulmonary edema. There will be a rapid low volume thready pulse because of low effective stroke volume, and they can have associated PAH, and JVP may be elevated with a prominent V wave if there is associated tricuspid valve regurgitation. So in a hemodynamically significant MR, the following parameters are seen. There is a hyperdynamic LV impulse with a late parasternal lift and wide split S2 in expiration, and prominent S4 can be seen, and S3 with a diastolic flow rumble. Whereas in a severe mitral regurgitation, there is a small volume quick rising pulse, that is small water hammer pulse, with a LV apical impulse which is displaced outward and lateralward with the associated apical thrill, and with the presence of LV-S3 with mid-diastolic flow rumble, and the intensity of murmur will be high associated with thrill. So there is in acute MR the comparison with chronic MR. Mostly acute MR patients are unstable patients. Chronic MR, there is associated, they can have, because of LA dilatation, they will have atrial fibrillation, and there can be hyperkinetic LV with apical displacement associated with S3, whereas S4 in acute MR. And coming to the mitral valve prolapse, it is mostly confined to the late systole. Mostly the complications which are commonly seen in mitral valve prolapse are there is associated risk of 5% risk of infective endocarditis. The patients can have embolic phenomenon with and 10 to 15% of the patients can have severe mitral regurgitation. Coming to salient features in mitral valve prolapse are they can have multiple clicks. That is, these are non-ejection clicks which are mostly seen in mid or late systole. This is the most specific feature of mitral valve prolapse. Better heard at apex, and as the MR in mitral valve prolapse, it is preload dependent. That is, it depends on the LV volume. So the degree of prolapse is inversely proportional to the LV size. So whereas in standing position or during Valsalva, that is strain phase of Valsalva, or any intervention or any maneuver which decreases the LV volume, there is an exaggeration of the mitral valve there is an increased mitral regurgitation with increased duration of the MR. Whereas with the squatting and isometric exercise where there is increased LV volume, the click murmur complex will be more delayed, and the duration of murmur is short. So coming to the prolapsing threshold, whereas so as there is with increased LV volume, that is in patients with squatting or passive leg rising, in supine position patients, the click murmur will be more delayed, whereas in standing patients, or in the strain phase of patients, the click murmur will be more early. So coming to the dynamic auscultation, which can differentiate MVP MR from HCM and mitral regurgitation murmurs. Other mitral regurgitation murmur are in Valsalva. Only in strain phase of Valsalva of maneuver, the murmurs which are increased in intensity and duration are only HOCM with SAM with MR, or in patients with MVP with MR. In all other, the intensity of murmur and duration will be decreased. Whereas in standing or with exercise, there is an increase in intensity of murmur and duration. With the amyl nitrate, there is a decrease in the preload, so there is an increased duration of the murmur. Then click and murmur will be more early, even in MVP and even in HCM. So coming to the questions, bedside parameters and hemodynamically significant MR, which are the exception, which is not true. Is it duration of the murmur or presence of S3, or is it a split S2 in expiration, or is it mid-diastolic tremor? So how is the murmur, MVP MR murmur in strain phase of Valsalva? Is it delayed click with a short murmur, or is it early click with a long murmur? So what does S4 in MR excludes? Is it ischemic, flail, or rheumatic, or functional MR? So what is the parasternal lift in patients with severe MR?
Yeah, thank you, Guru. Extensively covered. I think due to limited time, we'll move on to the next topic. Dr. Vijay Kumar, you want to say anything? Unmute, sir. Unmute.